I thought the courtroom would be the end of it, the final chapter in a story I never wanted to live through. But endings in real life aren't as clean as they are in books or movies. The gavel fell, the judge dismissed the case, and yet the hollow ache inside me lingered. Victory felt like a heavy crown. Yes, I had won, but at what cost? My family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, had turned into enemies I couldn't recognize anymore. I remember walking out of the courthouse into the sunlight. Cameras flashed, strangers whispered, and my lawyer tried to shield me from the noise, but none of it mattered. What mattered was the warmth of the sun on my face, the way the light cut through the shadows I had lived under for so long. For the first time, I felt the possibility of freedom. But with freedom came silence, and silence can be louder than any accusation. At night, I would lie awake in my small apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying the years of my mother's words. Ungrateful girl, selfish child, lost to greed. They echoed like a curse, a soundtrack to my life that refused to fade. I had proven her wrong in court, but inside I still felt like that little girl begging for her approval. That's the cruelest part of betrayal. It's not the knife they thrust into your back. It's the way the wound keeps bleeding long after the blade is gone. I tried to fill the silence with work. I poured myself into projects, stayed late at the office, kept busy enough to drown out the noise in my head. And yet whenever I came home, the emptiness was waiting for me, perched in the corner like an old friend. That's when I turned back to my grandmother's letters. I read them over and over, tracing her handwriting with trembling fingers clinging to her words like oxygen. My darling, you were always enough. That single sentence became my lifeline. Still, I couldn't escape the whispers. My mother's lies had traveled farther than I thought. Old neighbors looked at me with suspicion. Distant relatives who had once smiled at me now avoided my gaze. Betrayal spreads like wildfire, scorching everything in its path, and though the courtroom had doused the flames, the smoke still lingered. It was around this time that I realized something important: revenge isn't always loud. It doesn't always come with fire and fury. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is survival, living, thriving in spite of the pain. So I started small. I redecorated my apartment with secondhand furniture, turning the bare walls into something that felt like home. I began volunteering at a local shelter, the kind of place my grandmother would have loved because giving to others reminded me of her warmth. And I invested carefully, not in flashy luxuries, but in stability, in security, in a future that belonged to me alone. But life has a way of circling back to test you. Months after the trial, I got a call from an aunt I hadn't spoken to in years. Her voice was hesitant, trembling even. She said my mother wasn't doing well, that her health was failing, that she had sold her house, that the woman who once ruled the family with iron fists was now sitting in a small rented room with nothing but her bitterness for company. I wish I could tell you I felt joy, that I laughed, that I finally tasted the sweetness of karma. But the truth is more complicated. What I felt was sorrow, deep aching, sorrow for the mother I had wanted, but never had, for the love she had squandered, for the years we could never get back. Revenge doesn't erase grief. It only sharpens it. Still, I did not go back. I knew better than to reopen wounds that had finally begun to heal. Some ties must remain severed for us to survive. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, I opened my grandmother's final letter. It was short, but its words carried more weight than anything my mother had ever said to me. You never had to earn my love. Let this inheritance remind you not of money, but of worth. Live your life boldly, freely, without apology. I cried that night, but for the first time my tears weren't for my mother's rejection. They were for the gift my grandmother had given me permission to choose myself. And so I began to build again, not out of fear, not out of longing, but out of love. My own love. Freedom tasted different once I stopped looking over my shoulder. For so long I had defined myself by my mother's voice, by the way she could turn a room against me with just a few words. But now that voice had grown quieter, not because she had stopped trying, but because I had stopped listening. I poured myself into the life I was slowly creating. My job, though modest, began to feel like more than just a paycheck. It became a place where my worth was measured not by bloodlines, but by effort. My apartment, once cold and bare, blossomed into a reflection of who I was becoming. Shelves lined with secondhand books, plants stretching toward the window, photographs of my grandmother smiling in her garden. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And still the past found ways to tug at me. One afternoon, as I was walking home from work, I caught sight of a familiar figure across the street. My cousin, the same one who had avoided my eyes at that first family meeting. He looked older, wearier, like the weight of siding with my mother had carved lines into his face. Our eyes met briefly, and in that moment I saw something I hadn't expected: shame. He didn't speak, neither did I. But his gaze followed me until I turned the corner, and I knew that even if no apology ever came, the truth had unsettled them all. That's when I began to understand the quiet power of living authentically. Revenge wasn't just about taking something back. It was about forcing those who wronged you to face the reality of who you've become without them. My existence, my joy, my survival. It was a mirror they couldn't escape. But healing is not linear. Some nights the grief came back like a tide I couldn't fight. I would wake from dreams where my mother's voice called me daughter with tenderness, only to open my eyes and feel the hollow emptiness of knowing it would never be true. Those were the nights I clutched my grandmother's letters to my chest, whispering her words aloud, until they soothed me back to sleep. My darling, you were always enough. I carried those words everywhere like armor. And yet life has a way of offering you unexpected turns. One evening I received an invitation in the mail. It was from another cousin, someone who had been quiet during all the chaos. He was getting married and he wanted me there. My first instinct was suspicion. Was this another setup? Another family ambush dressed in celebration? But as I read his note, something softened in me. He wrote, "You don't owe anyone forgiveness, but I want you to know I see you. And I want you to be part of my joy." I debated for days. The thought of stepping back into that world filled me with dread, but something inside whispered that maybe this was not about them, it was about me, about proving that I could walk into any room without shrinking. The wedding day arrived and I dressed carefully, choosing a simple dress my grandmother would have loved. When I walked into the hall, heads turned. Whispers fluttered like moths in the air. But I kept my chin high, my steps steady. My cousin smiled when he saw me, genuine and warm, and for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't just the black sheep, I was a person worth celebrating. My mother wasn't there. I had been told her health kept her away. Part of me was relieved, part of me ached. But as the night went on, as laughter filled the room and I danced under the twinkling lights, I realized something important: I didn't need her there. Her absence no longer defined me. My presence did. It was then that I understood what my grandmother had meant when she said, "Live boldly, freely, without apology." She hadn't just been giving me permission, she had been giving me a challenge. To carve a life that wasn't built around wounds but around healing. The wedding ended with music and warmth, and as I left, one of my aunts, an aunt who had once called me selfish, touched my arm. "You look happy," she said softly, almost guiltily. I met her eyes and simply nodded. I didn't need her apology anymore. I didn't need her validation, because the truth was I had finally begun to validate myself. And that, more than any courtroom victory or inheritance, was the real inheritance my grandmother had left me. Life after the wedding felt different, like I had crossed an invisible threshold. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. For the first time in years, laughter came easily, without the heaviness of guilt weighing it down. I cooked meals for myself, without remembering the arguments at my mother's table. I let myself dream again, not of escaping, but of building something new. But healing has a strange way of luring old ghosts back into the light. One evening, as I was walking up the stairs to my apartment, I found an envelope taped to my door. No return address, just my name written in sharp, hurried strokes. My stomach knotted the moment I saw it. I already knew whose handwriting it was. Inside was a single page. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of years. "I am sick. I don't want to die without seeing you, please." It was my mother's handwriting, uneven and shaky, but still unmistakable. I sat there on the cold stairs for what felt like hours, staring at those words, my mind spinning in circles. She had never begged for anything in her life. She had commanded, demanded, accused, but never pleaded. A storm raged inside me. Part of me wanted to rip the letter into shreds, to throw it away and let her drown in the bitterness she had chosen. But another part, the part that still longed for a mother, ached at the thought of her facing death alone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window clutching the letter, asking myself whether this was another trick, another attempt to pull me back into her orbit. Or was it real this time? Was it the final chapter neither of us had expected? Days passed before I made my decision. I told myself I wasn't going for her, I was going for me. To look her in the eye one last time, not as her broken child but as the woman I had become. When I entered the small, dimly lit room she was renting, the air smelled faintly of medicine and dust. She was thinner than I remembered, her skin pale, her once commanding presence reduced to a frail figure under a blanket. For a long moment she didn't even recognize me. But then her eyes widened, and she whispered my name like it was a prayer. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. Her voice was weak, trembling. For years I had imagined this moment her broken me triumphant. But standing there all I felt was an aching sorrow. We spoke little. She tried to apologize, the words halting clumsy like a language she didn't know how to speak. She said she had been afraid of losing control, afraid of being forgotten, afraid of me becoming stronger than her. She admitted she had hated my closeness with Grandma because it reminded her of what she could never give me. For a moment I saw her not as the monster who had haunted my life, but as a woman consumed by her own insecurities. And I realized something that startled me. I didn't need her apology. Not anymore. "I'm not here to forgive you," I said quietly. "I'm here to let go." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't cry. I had shed enough tears for both of us over the years. When I left that room, I didn't look back. I knew it was the last time I would see her. Weeks later, I heard she had passed away. The news came not with shock, but with an eerie calm. I lit a candle for her, not because she had earned it, but because I needed to release the last of the anger I had carried for so long. And then I closed that chapter forever. In the quiet that followed, I finally understood what true revenge looked like. It wasn't winning in court. It wasn't holding the inheritance. It wasn't even standing tall in front of the family that had once scorned me. True revenge was freedom. The freedom to walk away without hatred chaining me down. The freedom to live a life that wasn't defined by her shadows. It was in that freedom that I found peace. Grief doesn't always come with wailing and chaos. Sometimes it arrives like a soft tide rolling over you quietly until you realize you've been standing in water all along. That's what it felt like after my mother's death, a muted ache, not sharp, not loud, just there. I didn't attend her funeral. Some of my relatives sent messages, half-hearted invitations disguised as guilt. "She was still your mother," one aunt wrote, as though biology should outweigh years of cruelty. But I knew better. I had already said my goodbye in that dim little room, and I refused to perform grief for people who never saw me when I was drowning in it. Instead, I sat on my porch that evening with one of my grandmother's old letters in my hands. The sky was painted in oranges and pinks the way she used to love, and I imagined her sitting beside me, her hand warm against mine. I read her words again, the ones that had saved me countless times before. "My darling, live boldly, freely, without apology." It struck me then that my grandmother's greatest gift wasn't money, wasn't property, wasn't even the legal shield she so carefully left behind. It was the permission to live without begging for love that would never come. It was the courage to stop seeking validation from people who thrived on withholding it. So I began to build a new kind of family. Not with the relatives who betrayed me, but with the people who chose me. Friends who showed up on hard days. Mentors who believed in me. Strangers who became sisters through kindness. Piece by piece, I stitched together a life that felt whole. I invested my inheritance in things that mattered. Education, security, quiet, stability. I donated to causes that would have made Grandma proud, places where children like me could feel seen and protected. Each act felt like planting seeds in soil she had tilled long before I even understood what she was doing. And slowly I healed. I won't lie to you and say the scars disappeared. They didn't. Sometimes when I hear a mother call to her daughter in the grocery store, a pang of envy twists in my chest. Sometimes in the quiet hours of the night, I still hear my mother's voice calling me ungrateful. Trauma lingers, it doesn't just evaporate. But I've learned that scars don't make you broken. They make you human. If you've listened this far, maybe you know what it's like to carry wounds that never seem to close. Maybe you've been betrayed by the very people who were supposed to love you most. If so, hear me when I say this: you are not what they say you are. You are not the weight of their cruelty or the lies they told to protect their pride. You are the choices you make when no one is watching. You are the love you give freely, even when it isn't returned. You are the strength you build in the shadows when the world turns its back. And one day, when the people who tried to break you finally fall silent, you will hear it, the sound of your own voice, steady and free, telling your story without shame. That is the truest revenge of all. If this story touched your heart, I'd be so grateful if you would like this video, share it with someone who might need courage today, and subscribe for more stories of resilience, betrayal, and truth. And please leave a comment below. Tell me your story. I promise I'll listen.